fifth dimension, beyond that which is known to man. It is a dimension as vast as space and as timeless as infinity. It is the middle ground between light and shadow, between science and superstition, and it lies between the pit of man's fears and the summit of his knowledge. This is the dimension of imagination. It is an area which we call the Twilight Zone.
It's President's Day 2025, and this is Keith from the Bomb Shelter with Katie and Keith. Katie is still recovering, and I decided to do something a little different today. This is a one-shot. We're just going to talk about one thing today. On September 29th, 1961, on the CBS television network, Rod Serling's Twilight Zone televised an episode called The Shelter.
What you're about to watch is a nightmare. It is not meant to be prophetic. It need not happen. It's the fervent and urgent prayer of all men of goodwill that it never shall happen. But in this place, in this moment, it does happen. This is the Twilight Zone.
So let me tell you a little bit about that episode. The plot is this. It is a typical evening in a typical suburban community outside of New York City. At the residence of physician Bill Stockton, he enjoys a birthday party being thrown for him by his wife Grace and their son Paul. Also at the party are Jerry Harlow, Bill's brother-in-law, Frank Henderson, and Marty Weiss. Bill and Jerry's former college roommates and the wives of the children of Jerry, Frank, and Marty. Bill is well known and liked by the gathering. Moreover, Bill has repeatedly administered to the health and well-being of each of his guests. Everyone is friendly and jovial, even when mention is made of Bill's late-night work on a fallout shelter, which he has built in his basement. Suddenly, a civil defense announcement overheard by young Paul is made that unidentified objects have been detected heading for the United States. And these times, everyone knows what that means. Nuclear attack.
Said something about turn to the Conrad station on the radio.
Are you sure that that's what you heard, Polly?
I didn't hear wrong, Pop. That's what he said.
4 minutes ago, the President of the United States made the following announcement. Our distant early warning line and ballistics early warning line reported radar evidence of unidentified flying objects flying due southeast. As of this moment, we have been unable to determine the nature of these objects, but for the time being, in the interest of national safety, we are declaring a state of yellow alert. The civil defense authorities request that if you have a shelter already prepared, go there at once.
So this episode today in From the Bomb Shelter is simply entitled The Bomb Shelter. And I thought about it for a while this afternoon as I was thinking of doing this episode. I thought about my bomb shelter, which resembled Dr. Stockton's bomb shelter in the episode on the Twilight Zone in many ways, for they were built, theoretically, within a few years of each other. They both have cinder block walls, built-in shelves. They're constructed off the basement and below level. I didn't even realize what this was until a neighbor told me, there's a bomb shelter in your house. The person who told me this was one of the elders of the Orthodox synagogue across the street. The house that I live in was built for a man named Edward Greenwald, who with his wife Sylvia, having been married in 1943, owned a business in nearby McKeesport, Pennsylvania. He bought the land in May of 1956 and built the house shortly thereafter. I am, according to county records, the fourth owner and the third to occupy it on a permanent basis. Mr. Greenwald was apparently thinking ahead in 1956. That was the year just before intercontinental ballistic missiles. One had to actually pilot a bomber to drop a nuke back then. That would change in the following year. Today's bomb shelters are a little different. Middle-class people don't generally build them anymore. They're quite expensive. Like me, they inherit them. The rich, we know, are building vast underground shelters to protect them from the results of what they've been doing to the rest of us. Now, whether you have a 1956 shelter or a modern rich man shelter, essentially they are for the same purpose. When you shut the door on your shoulder, you are closing yourself off from a world gone mad. So what happens in Serling's teleplay? Now the neighbors, once so cordial and friendly, now turn on each other like hyenas. The doctor can't possibly shelter all of them in a shelter built for 3, so it's every family for themselves, until it isn't. Of note in this teleplay, and Serling does this quite often to get people to look inside themselves and inside their societies, he inserts a Hispanic character into the show. The other characters turn on this man for being foreign and coming here with your foreign ideas and taking up space. Eventually, he's knocked out by a punch from one of the other men. Eventually, the rest of them do unite, but for a bad reason. They get a battering ram to knock down Dr. Stockton's bomb shelter door.
Why don't we just go down to his basement and break down the door? Come on, let's get it in there.
And in the end, they realize something about themselves. That the most ordinary of people can and will turn on each other when faced with an existential threat.
We'll pay for the damages, Bill.
I wonder if any one of us has any idea what those damages really are. Maybe one of them is finding out what we're really like when we're normal. We were spared a bomb tonight, but I wonder if we weren't destroyed even without it.
A little history about this episode from Wikipedia. This episode, from September of 1961, aired after a summer in which the fallout shelter had loomed large in national discourse due to the Berlin crisis of 1961. Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev had insisted, not for the first time, that NATO troops be withdrawn from Berlin and hand the city over to East Germany. Khrushchev explicitly threatened thermonuclear war if the United States refused to relent. Kennedy responded publicly 7 weeks later in a televised address July 25, 1961. During the speech, Kennedy stated his intention to ensure access to shelters in the event of a nuclear attack on the United States. In the aftermath of the speech, numerous companies began producing such shelters, and products were sold with explicit reference to the shelters. For instance, Foamettes toothpaste tablets boasted that they could be used wherever you are, even in a family fallout shelter. Rod Serling saw an opportunity for urgent social commentary and rushed into production an episode that would comment on prevailing anxieties. 2 weeks after the episode aired, the crisis escalated and construction of the Berlin Wall began. So it got me thinking. What are we really doing here? It appears now that the West, including and especially the United States, is constructing our own bomb shelter. One to keep out the nasty foreigners, who, as Donald Trump said back in 2016, quote, "When Mexico sends its people, they're not sending the best. They're not sending you. They're not sending you. They're sending people who have lots of problems, and they're bringing those problems with them. They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists. And some, I assume, are good people," end quote. Like Dr. Stockton, some of the bomb shelters say they're doing it for our own or bomb shelter makers, I should say they're doing it for our own well-being. The country obviously can't hold everyone that wants to come in. After all, as Stephen Miller said in the Madison Square Garden speech, we want to see America for Americans. And these people are not the white people we think of as being Americans. So as the global south catches on fire, we are going to close the bomb shelter door and insulate ourselves from the mayhem that we helped create. Now, people left alone for a long time in shelters don't fare well. The men and women who occupy the ICBM shelters underground in North Dakota and elsewhere are not left down there for more than one shift. They know what is expected of them if the alert happens. They know how many people will die when they turn those keys. And they know what will be their fate as well when the other side turns their keys. You don't serve long in that role without it affecting your mental well-being. That's why the Air Force provides these airmen with supportive services, but nevertheless they suffer damage. It's basically you, your buddy, a wall of switches and lights, and a communications device, and the hours pass by one after the other. Now, shelters mean that you'll survive the initial disaster, and that's about it. You may live another month, maybe a year, maybe a little more. But eventually the food and water run out, and you either go mad or die of starvation or suicide because you can't eat your ammunition. Eventually, you have to face the world as it is. A little earlier today on Threads, I wrote the following. Trump, the AfD in Germany, or the Alternative für Deutschland, the right-wing group, and all the other neo-Nazi and fascist movements in the world, it was all inevitable. It will get worse, and it's driven by climate migration. As the global south continues to suffer the worst effects of climate change, as crops dry up, storms increase, and people grow hungry, they are moving north. And as they move north, all the old hatreds that were formerly insulated and buried under an avalanche of post-World War II prosperity come rising to the surface again. As they do, politically racist movements, which it would have been anathema 20 years ago, suddenly become the rallying cry for a resurgent right wing, and also accepted by many who would call themselves centrist otherwise. Together they gave us Trump. They may give eventually Germany Wedel, France Le Pen, and Italy Meloni. And since climate change will only get worse, so will immigration, and so too will neo-fascist movements. Eventually, I predict fascism will be the preeminent governing ethos in the West. But what can we do about it? Precious little. Human nature, as Serling demonstrated in its rawest form, is coming to the fore and will not be denied. Watch any episode of the Twilight Zone like this. I would suggest also The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street, and you'll see what I mean. We can, at best, try to maintain our sense of decency and humanity without expecting our neighbors to do the same, because many of them won't. I wish I could offer any words of encouragement, but I can't, because I do need to be honest about these things. Life is going to get more unbearable for good-hearted empaths, and each of us will have to deal with it as best we can. Some of us will reach our breaking point and make an ultimate decision. Others will trudge on, trying to make their area of the world a better place as best they can. But make no mistake, the bad times are here, and they won't get any better. And eventually, climate change or nuclear war will ring the curtain down on humanity. And I am very deeply sorry about all of this. 77 million of our fellow Americans voted to close the door, pull up the ladder, dispense with the milk of human kindness, brandish our guns, and hunker down to an uncertain fate. What we are about to experience is a nightmare. It needn't have happened. It was the fervent and urgent prayer of all people of goodwill that it wouldn't happen. But in this place, and in this moment, it does happen. Welcome to the American bomb shelter.
No moral, no message, no prophetic tract. Just a simple statement of fact. For civilization to survive, the human race has to remain civilized. Tonight's very small exercise in logic from the Twilight Zone.